Night air presses against a stone face that will not blink. A pair of wide eyes, ringed in grooves, carved by a hand long vanished, stare from a lintel above a dark doorway, as if to hold the world still for a heartbeat. The promise is not safety, but a bargain pass beneath and be seen, or turn away and leave your fear at the threshold. The oldest Greek poets begin at the edge. In the Iliad recited in the late 8th century BCE, Athena strides into battle carrying the aegis, a storm-black hide set with the grim head of a gorgon, a sign that turns courage to chill inside the chest of whoever meets it. The Odyssey sends its hero down into the tholos of the dead and stops him with a line that tastes of metal go now, before the gorgon's head appears from Hades to freeze your limbs. Those lines are an anchor for an image already feared and already used, a mask whose work is to guard by frightening, to defend by being unbearable to look at. Hesiod's Theogony answers with a genealogy. Working in the late 8th to early 7th century BCE, the Boeotian singer threads a line through seaborne monsters to coastal daughters. Phorcys and Ceto, ancient shapes of reef and shark shadow, bring forth the Graeae, gray from birth, and the Gorgons, who dwell beyond famous Oceanus, near the night. Far west, where maps give way to wind, he names them without filigree Stheno, Euryale, Medusa. He marks one fact the way a chisel cuts a letter into stone. Only Medusa is mortal. The rest of his lines run dark and fast, but the details stick. Poseidon mates with Medusa, Perseus takes her head from the cutthroat leap Pegasus and Chrysaor. Athena wears the head, and nobody doubts why. The poem gives no mirror, no sandals, no one-eyed hags yet. It locates the sisters in that place Greek thought reserves for what resists measure, and it fixes the Gorgon's skull to a goddess, whose glare already breaks ranks on the plain. Art takes the cue and refuses to soften the face. In the first half of the 6th century BCE, potters in Attica paint a round mask in the tondo of a kylix, so that a drinker lifts wine to his mouth and meets a mouth wider than his own. On those painted discs, the features repeat, like a ritual bulging eyes with concentric rings, pupils drilled black, a tongue pushed out and curved down, boar-like tusks that turn the smile to a threat, hair that departs from hair and becomes snakes or stiff locks like snakes. The gorgonein settles into shields, where the hollow bronze bulges outward like a cheek, into antefixes, where terracotta caps the sawtooth line of roof tiles above a street in Magna Graecia, into pendants, and pins whose purpose is not ornament but refusal. The lolling tongue is not a joke. The face offers a picture of panic to the evil eye and throws the evil back. There is a place where this image expands until it swallows architecture. On Corfu, ancient Kerkyra, around 580 BCE, masons and painters mount a triangular storm over the west pediment of the Temple of Artemis. At its center, a Gorgon runs. She bends one knee and lifts the other in the old Neolaf stride that squeezes motion into stone, a body knotted like a bow pulled tight. Her head is not the later girl with a cruel mouth. It is the archaic mask grown to the size of a boulder. Two panthers flank her like day and night. At her feet, the foals of violence keep pace, the winged horse, Pegasus, and the warrior Chrysaor. Proof that the blood the poets promised knows how to draw figures on stone. The pediment includes other stories at other scales. Zeus wrestles a giant to the side in relief like a note scribbled. In a margin, but the temple's front face is the Gorgon. Worshippers walk under her to enter. The gorgoneion is not a portrait. It is an operation performed at the threshold, where every anxiety gathers: envy, impurity, oath-breaking, the chance that the god within will look outward and take offense. The material vocabulary repeats far from Corfu. On the Acropolis at Selinus on Sicily's southwestern coast, mid-6th century BCE cutters lift 4 blocks into a square metope and set a small myth like a seal. They show Perseus in a flat profile, a young man in a short tunic reaching out to a figure whose head he is in the act of severing, while Athena stands poised with a calm weight to the left. The metope comes from Temple C, built around 550 BCE, and preserves a killing that seems almost oddly domestic in its tidiness. The Gorgon kneels. The hero holds a curved blade. The goddess watches with the controlling hand of a patron. The faces keep the archaic rules. Medusa's mask is not a woman's face yet. The tusks still show. The scene freezes a split second during which gods and mortals share the same stone. The viewer understands that what happens in the metope will fuel what hangs on the aegis or stares from a lintel. The head leaves the body and becomes a thing to be used. The work of using it shapes daily objects. Black figure painters around 530 to 500 BCE decorate kylikes not only with stories on the exterior walls, but with a Gorgon's head inside the bowl, so that the banquet itself carries a small danger. A hoplite's round aspis, a bronze-faced shield backed by wood, bears a painted gorgoneion as a pledge and a performance advance, and you will meet your own fear return to you. The image migrates to coinage in cities of southern Italy and Sicily, so that the hand that buys bread touches a stamped mask, and a market becomes another threshold where risk trades places with luck. On door lintels and on the end tiles of roofs, the terracotta faces rot and are replaced, found cracked in the earth by archaeologists at sites where houses once leaned into one another like shoulders. The earliest storytellers keep the Gorgon at a distance. Homer never names Medusa. He lets the head radiate from Athena's aegis and from the mouth of Hades as a threat held in reserve. Hesiod places the sisters at the western rim in a house of night. That placement matters. The far west is where the sun sinks, where the living approach a border that resists measure, and where Greek sailors approach islands they will name only when they find fresh water on them. The daughters of Phorcys and Ceto dwell in an address, daughters that doubles as a warning here. The angles of law do not hold. When a mask migrates from that realm to a temple, it brings the border along with it and nails it above the priest's head. Liminality hardens into a craft. Somewhere in Argolid or in Attica, in a smithy that smells of charcoal and hides, a bronze worker lifts a thin plate from the quench and polishes it until his filthy hands cast shadows on it. A mirror points backward as much as it points forward. It reports, with faithless accuracy, whatever enters its circle, but it also lets a bearer face toward danger without offering himself. If a goddess will entrust a boy with a way to survive a gaze that kills, a clean bronze shield will do what a glass mirror cannot. It will be both armor and instrument. The ancients know the properties of polished bronze. Intimately, a concave surface magnifies. A convex surface throws back distorted. A warrior learns his own face on the underside of the curve. The mirror that matters most in this story is not handheld. It is the gleam on the inside of a shield, held just so under a lintel where a mask already hangs. At the fringes of the tail, the other sisters wait. The Graeae, gray-haired from birth, live near the Gorgons in Hesiod's verse. But the details that make them gruesome arrive later, in the tradition that will be written down by mythographers like Pseudo-Apollodorus centuries afterward. A single eye and a single tooth passed from hand to hand. The landscape remains firm even as the names shift: rocky shores, long swells from an open sea, a cave that smells of salt and damp animal. The encounter with them will be shaped by absence and by borrowing. The hero's trick of intercepting one shared organ turns a bodily symbol into a map of information. If you want directions to someone who cannot be seen, you must first take the only way they see. These elements flicker at the edge of the archaic stage. They belong to a cycle already forming, in which parents, sisters, and thresholds lock together like seams on a cuirass. The archaic Gorgon is not yet a woman wronged. She is a force condensed into a face. That force has a job. In Greek, apotropaic names an act that turns something away: the eye of envy, a disease, a dangerous visitor, and the gorgoneion is one of its hardest-edged tools. This is why the mask sits at doors, and at the roofline, why a pendant hangs between a person and the street, why Athena's aegis includes it as a symbol of a goddess who, in Homer, moves fear across the field like a weather front. A temple pediment is a public throat. A city pours worship through it. The mask guards that passage. A shield is a mobile doorway. A phalanx advances a wall of thresholds. The masks set into them multiply the line. The figure's monstrous features are not accidents of taste. They work like barbs. Inside the sanctuaries, the gods receive offerings in the presence of the mask. In sanctuaries of Artemis, a goddess who patrols borders between wilderness and town, the Gorgon appears with a particular intensity. Corfu's temple is one example. On other sites, smaller terracottas repeat the face with minor variations: nose broader, tongue more forked, hair more tightly curled into snakes. The goddess of the hunt does not predict the myth of a decapitation, but the Ark's cross. Athena stands inside the story of Perseus. Artemis stands under an image of the head. Both represent power used to police lines that mortals fear to cross. If the Gorgon dwells at the western edges of the world, her face also sits on the literal edges of sacred space, and the distant night flows into a carved pediment at midday. On pottery, the figure shifts from an abstract mask to a body. The earliest bodies are more like warning signs than people: a torso with wings, legs frozen in a running stance, arms stretched in a permanent reach. On a black figure amphora from the 6th century BCE, the painter might place two smaller gorgoneia, where breasts might sit, as if the body itself has sprouted faces. That doubling is not a mistake. It is a way to saturate the skin with protection. On a kylix by Exechius or his circle, a hero pursues a woman with snakes for hair, and the painter bends the neck to make a line of flight. But the head on the shield he carries repeats the face he is about to take. The cup forces the drinker to reenact the exchange of looks every time he brings the rim to his teeth. Hesiod's few lines leave a long trail for other hands to fill. The word kibisis, the bag that will hold the head, lives in sources that like to list objects, but the object itself feels simple: a skin bag, perhaps of leather, perhaps dedicated afterward in a temple, because you do not keep a thing like that in a house. Hades' cap of invisibility belongs to a set of tools mortals borrow when gods have decided that their own order requires an exception. Hermes' winged sandals, Teleria, speak in one gesture of a speed that violates distance without destroying it. Athena's bronze shield is the instrument that reverses the direction of looking. All these items function as ways to pass across boundaries temporarily without breaking them forever. A story that treats the Gorgon as a person and not only as a face will need such implements to justify how a living man could approach something set at the edge of the map. Artifacts anchor the shift from edge to action. The metope from Selinus shows an act in progress. A bronze plaque from an unknown shield, now green with corrosion in a museum case, shows a gorgoneion hammered in repoussé, eyes pushed out from behind with careful blows, eyelids defined with a chasing tool, nostrils punched and widened with the small flare of a burin. A terracotta antefix from Paestum, 5th century BCE, repeats the tongue, and tusks with that half-comic brutality that archaic art can hold without irony. An Attic Lakithos from around 500 BCE shows a woman holding a mirror. A small gorgoneion floats on the back side of the vase opposite her face, like a diameter drawn through clay. These objects insist that the Gorgon is as much an operation as a character. The landscape of the story supports the technical demands of meeting such an operation. The hero must travel far enough west that the admonitions of the old poets feel literal, beyond Oceanus, near night. In practice, that means islands like Seriphos and paths across the Saronic Gulf, coastal caves that channel wind like an organ, and promontories where fishermen sleep because the sea is their floor. When later authors place Perseus in specific towns and sanctuaries, they tend to favor shorelines, and the sea remains the map's wide margin. A boy born in a chest set afloat, as some versions have it, builds a life that will return to saltwater at every turn. The archaic mask holds the line while the story coalesces. In Athens, in the 6th century BCE, lawmakers set up boundary stones to mark sacred precincts. The stones use writing to say what a face once said with shape alone. In sanctuaries, sacrifices come with formulae. The priest's knife follows the grain of law. The gorgoneion fits this development without losing any of its old force. It guards new order as well as old fear. It tells the eye to stop where law begins, and it offers an image of the stopping. Those who enter receive a message. Inside is the god, and if you bring in what should stay out, the look on this face is the look that will meet yours. One stream of interpretation follows from that work. The Gorgon is a threshold goddess in negative, a sacred no. Her head on Athena's aegis functions as that goddess's portable line-drawing device. The eye that sees the head sees the border before it sees Athena behind it. The face's power belongs to neither good nor evil. Like a lion on a pediment or a thunderbolt engraved on a bronze, it is an instrument in the hand of whoever mounts it. A statue of a maiden and a terracotta gorgon might share the same roofline, and thus share a labor, to shoulder the possibility that something unclean could enter, and to keep it from entering. The other stream that already begins in Hesiod runs toward bodies. Medusa is not immortal like Stheno and Euryale. She can be killed. That detail makes a different kind of story possible, one in which a mortal boy can perform an act a god will then use. If Athena wears the head that Perseus cuts off, Then the hero's act becomes a species of priestly labor, a sacrifice so strange that the result must be hung on a goddess's chest. The scene on the Selinus Metope embodies that logic. The goddess stands, the boy acts, the head becomes a thing with work to do. The earliest Perseus elements hover at the edge like tools laid out on a table at dusk. The Graeae have not yet surrendered their eye. The helm of Hades is biding time on a hook, in a cavern that nobody can find without an unsanctioned guide. Hermes' sandals wait like a rumor in a hymn. The bag lies flat, empty as a skin on the floor of a hut. The mirror-bright shield leans against a wall inside a workshop that already supplies shields to men who will never meet a monster, only other men. The difference between soldier and slayer lies in how you use the face on the outside, to frighten what faces you, or to take the face and refuse to face it at all. In domestic spaces, the mask's work touches cradles and chimneys. A gorgoneon scratched in charcoal on a wall near a hearth in a house. At Olympus keeps an eye on smoke, and a small clay pendant shaped like a gorgon's head, found in a grave near Corinth, curves against the sternum of the dead child who wore it. The line between temple and home is thin in a world where gods are neighbors who share the street. The Gorgon is a neighbor too, one whose courtesy consists in the promise to stare first. By the time Herodotus writes history in the 5th century BCE, the Greeks have made a habit of giving foreign faces Greek names and lining up unfamiliar gods with familiar ones. The Gorgon remains stubbornly particular. When travelers describe Egyptian goddesses with crowns and serpents, they add details, but they do not replace the mask's job with a foreign job. The Greek apotropaion has its own methods. Its spelling is carved into marble plaques as instructions, and the Gorgon's face remains the quick version of that script. Archaeology gives the story a ledger. Excavations at Selinunte record the blocks of Temple C Metope numbers, and the depths at which fragments lay in backfill after the temple fell. At Corfu, the museum keeps the monstrous pediment almost shockingly intact, paint traces dead as autumn leaves but still visible on stone hair. In Attic cemeteries, broken calyx tondi turn up with the central disc intact, a gorgoneion staring up from the dirt. These objects look back, with the same refusal they were built to perform, and the refusal is now directed at us. The face will not resolve into a single meaning. The tradition tightens its knots. The island of Seriphos gathers associations with a king who wants a woman and resents a boy, and the chest the boy and his mother floated in becomes a long-remembered object, lacquered with sea salt and luck. Athena's interest in the boy aligns with her older bond to the gorgoneion. She will show him how to approach without being seen, how to look without being looked at. Hermes, messenger and thief, will supply movement and cunning. A story has congealed that can carry across centuries and be carved in low relief one way in Sicily and painted on fine clay another way in Attica without tearing. Before the beheading enters, the face keeps doing its work in public. On Paros and Naxos, on Delos where the twin gods receive worship, on roads where shipbuilders hammer smells into wood, the gorgoneion appears in minor forms whose repetition is the point. The repetition matters because it habituates an eye to a duty, to respect the line a community has drawn. The very ugliness is a feature. It screams so the porch does not have to. Later poets will give the mirror a specific gleam. Ovid, in the 1st century CE, will pour Roman fascination with violated sanctuaries into the girl who becomes a monster. but those later lines do not erase the archaic face. In the archaic frame, the face is prior. The story grows to meet it. The pedestal-sized head on Corfu does not wait for a Roman to explain it. It does what it was set there to do, which is to beat back what would enter uninvited. The early Greek habit of setting terrifying figures at doors is not a quirk. The household gods include boundary keepers, like Hermes at the Hermstone, like Hecate at triple-jointed roads, figures that metabolize anxiety into custom. The Gorgon's head fits that cast without difficulty. When Athena loans the image to a boy, she enlists him into an ancient craft. He will act as a gate does. He will carry the mask to where it must be placed permanently, in the corner of a workshop, under rafters stained with smoke. A shield leans in flickering light. Bronze catches firelight the way the surface of a night sea catches star spark. A careful hand turns a cloth on the metal, circles and circles, following the same path the chisel once made around a pupil on a temple's roof tile. At a harbor, a fisherman knots a line and glances at a plaster disc nailed to his door. In a sanctuary, a priestess rehearses a hymn and pauses under a pediment where the running figure has been still for decades. The mask binds these scenes. It joins house, harbor, temple, and smithy into a single drama that does not need a curtain to separate acts. Somewhere else, on a margin the poets call beyond Oceanus, three sisters stand for a law outside law. Two cannot be killed. One can. A boy whom a goddess favors will need what archaic art has perfected to survive that fact. He will need borrowed speed, stolen sight, and a second face to interpose between himself and what looks back at him. He will need to stand at a threshold and make the threshold move with him. The archaic world brings him to that place with the steadiness of ritual. He walks under gorgoneia fixed to architraves by hands older than his father. He eats from cups that train his gaze to confront the unendurable by looking at its image and living through it. He learns the way light glances off armor, how to keep the angle when his arm grows tired. He watches a priest lift a knife and sees how calm cuts can honor a god. He absorbs the lesson carvers and potters and magistrates have been staging for 100 years. Fear, rightly placed, can keep a community intact. The face waits in a cave that smells of damp limestone and sea. The island wind enters, tangles itself in reeds, and leaves in a whistle that mimics a snake's breath. Somewhere close by, older sisters whose bodies make rules by existing pass an eye along a palm and miscount the spaces between their knuckles. A goddess steps in from the side, who knows how to turn the surface of a thing into a weapon. A god of roads, and word stands just beyond the line and looks down at the boy's feet. When he lifts the shield, the room goes still. The polished bronze catches an eyelash and makes it a blade. The snake's quiet as if listening. The mask at the doorway watches him raise another mask and marry it to his arm. He is still looking down, watching dull reflections in a color like deep noon. Somewhere beyond the rim of the metal, a breath arrives that is colder than the night wind, but he does not meet its source. The mirror rises to where a face will be, and the threshold moves into place. The breath that moves across the bronze smells of oil and ash. A second breath moves from deeper in the cave, colder and damp, and the snakes quiet the way oars quiet when a boatman listens for rocks near Seriphos. The hand that holds the shield knows its weight the way a smith knows a hammer. The edge of the metal carries a line of light that could cut without touching, and behind that line, the goddess's voice. has already taught him how to turn the surface of the world into a face that is not his. The girl who is not a girl lies on the rock shelf, where sea-wet limestone dries in streaks. The body keeps the proportions of the running figure carved on Corfu around 580 BCE, all knees and elbows and motion condensed. But this house of night has slowed the limbs to sleep. The earliest poets kept her unnamed and unplaced. The shape in this cave matches what Hesiod wrote in the late 8th or early 7th century BCE, when he listed Stheno, Euryale, and Medusa beyond Oceanus, near night, and then said only Medusa can die. The rule holds under the rock. The two immortals breathe differently, a rhythm with no hurry. The mortal sister exhales salt and blood and the faint musk of reptile skin. A different set of rules waits in the hero's kit. A pouch lies ready. The Greek word kibisis will be copied by mythographers on papyrus centuries later, but the hide in his hand is simple, oiled so it will not snag. On his feet, the talaria, winged sandals, are not feathers so much as speed grafted onto tendon, an attribute Hermes lends the way one lends a road. On his head sits invisibility itself, the kappa upsilon nue eta of Hades, a cap that makes a body into a rumor. Apollodorus, writing in the early Roman Empire, will call it the helm of Hades when he arranges the story in his bibliotheca, but the felt of it right now is cool and smells like caves. In his grip, a sickle-backed blade, a harp curves like the crescent a farmer uses in Argos to prune vines, except the edge is god metal and the cut it wants is singular. Behind all the gear stands an arrangement older than any one tale. Athena supplies a way to look without being looked at. In the Iliad's lines chanted in the late 8th century BCE, her aegis bears a Gorgon's head. That emblem has stared from temple roofs and shields in Attica and Magna Graecia for generations already. The same logic that sets a gorgoneion on the west pediment of the Temple of Artemis on Corfu now sends a polished shield into a cramped cavern. Both are threshold technologies. Both tell the eye where to stop. Before this cave, there was a road to it. At a place the poets file under far west, the Graeae sat in a weather-beaten cleft in the rock, gray from birth like old wool, sharing one tooth and one eye, a memory Hesiod leaves terse, and later sources embroider. Painters in Athens around 480 to 460 BCE begin to give them cloaks that hide their shoulders and a manner of sitting that suggests a habit formed over centuries. On some red figure vases, the old women extend a hand with a single eye, and inscriptions letter the scene with names that fix identities the way cicatrices fix skin: G rho alpha, time alpha iota, Perseus, Athena. The hero's trick intercepting the only way they see reads like a moral about knowledge and cost. Apollodorus will say he takes the eye and does not return it until they show him the nymphs who keep the cap, the sandals, and the bag. That exchange ends at a shoreline. On Selinus's Temple Sea, the mid-6th century BCE metope carvers captured a later moment, the cut itself, by compressing three figures into a square, Athena at the left with the calm stance of authority, Perseus in the act, and the Gorgon kneeling. The decapitation there is a tidy fact. In the cave, the fact is slower and colder. He keeps his eyes on the bronze. He does not breathe when the blade comes down. He feels the resistance of spine as a vibration in his forearm. The snakes flare. and die as if a flute's note had been severed from its instrument. The blood makes myth into genealogy on contact. Hesiod's Theogony guarantees that two beings will issue from the neck: Pegasus, winged horse, and Chrysaor, a figure whose name means golden sword. The surfaces of archaic pediments anticipated them. On Corfu's monstrous west gable, the twin offspring already ran at the mother's feet 2 centuries before this cave received them as event. Carvers in stone knew how to make inevitability visible long before a boy in a cap of invisibility pressed a head into a bag. When the 2 immortal sisters wake, their voices shred the air into strips like linen torn lengthwise. The cave amplifies the pitch. Perseus is already moving. The cap pulls him out of sight. The sandals tug him over a lip of stone into night wind. The bag at his hip talks to the world by not moving. The absence of light inside it has weight. On an attic Peleg by the Pan painter, around 470 BCE, the painter stretches the legs of the pursuing sisters on both sides of the vase, and the hero, tiny and quick, keeps his face turned away as if to remind the viewer that victory depends on a refusal. Boston's Museum of Fine Arts catalogs such a vessel under a number. The image itself records a physics of escape. The Greek mind repeats in scene after scene. The chase makes a line across maps. Seriphos will have its reckoning with Polydectes. Atlas will meet a gaze. He will not survive in the story Ovid arranges near the end of the 1st century BCE. Metamorphoses Book IV spreads the consequences outward until a mountain carries a man's name. But before those radiating episodes, the core exchange is set down in ritual order. The boy returns what was borrowed. The cap goes back to the chthonic owner whose gift it was. The sandals return to Hermes' precinct. The bag becomes a temple object, a thing you do not hang in a bedroom. The head moves into a different labor. The goddess takes it. Athena's aegis, a goatskin that in Homer's epic triggers panic by itself, receives the head and becomes a moving border. Bronze and ivory will carry that border as 3-dimensional theology in the mid-5th century BCE, when Phidias completes the Chryselephantine Athena Parthenos for the Parthenon on the Athenian Acropolis, circa 447 to 438 BCE. Ancient descriptions, Pausanias among them, a century and a half later, are specific about the gorgoneion set at the center of the aegis. Copies, reductions, and coins echo the placement. A Roman period marble, the so-called Medusa Rondinini, now in Munich's Glyptothek, conserves a type that probably descends from a classical original. The mask is no longer tusked and comic. It is beautiful and terrible at once. Lips parted without a lolling tongue, wings brushed back like hair. The shift in style registers a shift in use. What began as a blunt warning over doors learns how to face front in a goddess's company without rupturing the gaze of worship. Attic vase painters follow the change with a precision the eye can measure. In earlier black figure works, the Gorgon's face is a caricature with boar tusks and a tongue. By the severe style, after 480 BCE, red figure painters let the mouth close, refine the cheekbones, and transform snaky locks into an ornament that curls with a logic closer to hair than to literal serpents. The Berlin painter, active around 490 to 460 BCE, gives Athena a balanced gravity on Nolan amphorae, and the gorgoneion, small and central on the aegis, reads like a seal. The accessory never loses its apotropaic work. It learns how to perform it in a different register. The corpus of Attic scenes grows thick around the beheading, and the flight, a lekythos attributed to the Ligros group, shows Perseus, reaching from behind, face averted to shear the neck. The painter letters Vase along the body, so the viewer cannot mistake the subject, a habit of naming that frees the draftsman to stylize without losing clarity. On other vases, Hermes stands close with a caduceus, as if speed could be lent by proximity, while Athena's spear aligns with the line of the harp. The compositions teach the eye what victory looks like, not confrontation, not a duel of gazes, but the rule of angles, polish, and patronage. Outside the studio, the head now lives as a tool gods and kings can use. The story roots it through episodes that crystallize into set pieces. On the way back east, the hero meets Atlas at the western edge of the world, and in Ovid's Roman Latin, Atlas rejects him, the head rises, and a mountain fixes a human refusal to a landscape. In another episode, Polydectes on Seriphos demands proof that the quest is done. The hero produces an argument that any tyrant can see, and turns the court into a ring of stone. Those scenes are late elaborations in literary time, but they rhyme with the older practice of mounting, the face above doors, show the image to power, and watch power harden. The Hellenistic age multiplies supports for the image. Coins across the 3rd and 2nd centuries BCE set gorgoneia on shields held by Athenas, on the roundels of Macedonian or Pergamene issues, not because a city worships Medusa, but because rulers understand how much authority a sign can condense. The aegis itself migrates. Depictions of Alexander in the generation after his death sometimes cloak successors with attributes that include a scaled, Gorgon-centered aegis to claim divine sanction. Cameos carved in layered sardonyx fix a small Gorgon's face on a gem that could sit in a ring and make a fingertip carry a shrine's warning. The archaeology of Athens hardens the case. On the Acropolis, the Parthenon's colossal Athena no longer stands, but inscribed inventories record the care taken with the statue's gold plates, and the gorgoneion's place is a constant in later descriptions. Smaller bronzes of Athena, Roman copies of classical originals, wear miniature masks at the neck, their lips neither grinning nor protruding, their snakes stylized into an orderly crown. The beautiful, terrible type, sometimes called the Medusa Rondinini type, after that Munich piece, proves that a figure born in the archaic grimace could be translated into a face that a human could almost love and still not survive. The change in face does not falsify the older work, it repositions it. Where the Corfu pediment roars, the 5th century ivory and gold Athena murmurs, and the murmur proves more portable. A citizen standing on the Athenian Pantheistic Way during the festival in the later 5th century BCE would see a procession of girls and men bearing textiles to robe the goddess's ancient wooden image, the peplos woven with the battle of gods and giants. The gorgoneion at the center of Athena's chest would ride above the crowd like a compact cloud of refusal, and the city would read itself under that sign. The story accommodates other graphs. A strand of myth circulating by the classical period gives the blood from the Gorgon two opposed powers. Euripides in his Ion, performed in Athens in the late 5th century BCE, has Athena describe 2 drops from the severed neck, one that kills and one that heals, and she says she gave them to Erichthonius's descendants to guard. Later writers assign the healing drop to Asclepius, the physician god. The logic is clean. An apotropaion turns away harm, divided. Its essence can either prevent death or administer it. Even if the details travel, the principle holds steady. A head that stops enemies at a gate can freeze a man where he stands or return a body to balance. In Rome, centuries later, Ovid looks backward and decides to turn the matter inside out. In Metamorphoses Book 4, published under Augustus around 8 CE, he gives Medusa a past tense and a motive that makes other motives look indecent. She was once beautiful. Her hair in particular drew eyes. Poseidon violated her in Athena's temple. The goddess punished not the god, but the girl, transforming hair into snakes and face into an instrument that could make a world stand still. The version is Roman in the way it loves paradox. A sanctuary produces a sacrilege, a victim produces a weapon, a goddess known for justice produces an injustice that later poets and readers will call out. Ovid's lines are poetry, not law, but they carry a charge that rearranges how the face can be read. That rearrangement does not erase the temple pediment on Corfu or the Selinus metope. It overlays them like a second pigment. Archaic stone insists that the function precedes the story. A face set in the triangle above a door guards the passage and does not need to be explained. Ovid's Latin insists that a body precedes the function. The mask is a revenge. The two truths can live in the same head. Archaeologists can measure tusks and paint residues to date a gable to circa 580 BCE, and a reader can hear a Roman poet's cadence and feel a moral injury. When the gorgoneion slides onto Athena's aegis in a 5th century statue, both meanings can resonate at once, a sign of civic protection and the remains of a wrong. Vase painters seem to have sensed the tension before Ovid gave it executable Latin. In some late 5th century Attic works, Medusa's head becomes a human head with snakes, not a grimacing mask, and the painter lets pity into the pupils. The moment of beheading still happens, with averted eyes and a bright shield, but the telling lingers on the line of the neck, as if the act, once simply necessary, now aches. The label Medusa, written in careful letters, pins the image to a name the way a stone inscription pins a boundary, but the draftsmanship makes a second argument in curves. The Hellenistic taste for drama looks at the same material and sees theater. Reliefs and wall paintings from places like Pompeii, though strictly Roman, are the heirs of Hellenistic habits. A head of Medusa pinned to a shield on a wall can be either a ward against the evil eye or a conversation with myth's cruelty, depending on the doorway it guards. The head's capacity to be both brutal and beautiful serves a culture that values ambivalence as a luxury. A ruler can wear the aegis on a coin without having to choose between warning and charm. A householder can mount a gorgoneion mosaic in an entry and mean both protection and taste. Back in the classical center, the Perseus cycle settles into a standard sequence that any Athenian could recognize on sight. Graeae consulted by theft and bargain, nymphs as donors of invisible cap and sandals, Hermes as supplier of the steel, Athena as the angle of approach, a sleeping Gorgon, a mirrored shield, a bag, a pursuit, a safe return. The head as political instrument on Seriphos, the head as cosmic instrument at Atlas, the head as civic instrument on the aegis. The sequence is not a list, but a path through sanctuaries and workshops, over pediments, and across ceramic tondi. Each object in the path has a twin in clay, stone, or gold that a visitor can see behind glass in a museum case, with a placard that gives a date. The regional anchors keep the tale honest. Sicily's Selinunte, with its Temple C metope, catches the act at the oldest large scale in the West. Corfu's Artemis Temple makes the head a center of an entire facade. Attic pottery in the 6th to 5th centuries BCE, Ateliers records every stage in black and then red, the shift from tusks and tongue to the refined mask we know from Phidias's age. The Acropolis in Athens absorbs the myth into the goddess's body and then exports her as an idea to cities that want to model themselves on a city that defeats Persia and builds theaters for Euripides. Each site adds a layer of authority: temple, metope, vase, cult statue, coin. The ethics of the thing do not stand still either. If the archaic mask simply says no, the classical head starts to ask why. Euripides' double blood makes a pharmacology out of fear. Ovid's Roman line makes a moral case against a god, and a goddess without pretending mortals can judge them. Philosophers of the later schools, Stoics with their love of order, and Epicureans with their clean physics, take the head as just another emblem the city uses to regulate the passions, while ritual keeps mounting the same face on the same lintels, because the street still needs guarding and eyes still need instruction at the boundary between outside and inside. Meanwhile, the craft does not stop. In a 5th century foundry in Athens, a sculptor's apprentice uses a blunt tracer to define the edges of a gorgoneion on a scale model in clay. He thinks about the strands of the snakes as pattern rather than zoology. He looks up at a bronze Athena that may be a copy of Phidias's circle and sees how small the head sits on the broad field of the aegis. Across the Aegean in Ionia, an artisan in a city like Ephesus cuts a gorgon into a gemstone, trusting a client will use it as a signet, and thus press an apotropaic face into wax every time a contract is sealed. The legal and the magical share the same tool. The voyage of the head into Rome begins not with Ovid's story, but with habit. Greek shields with painted gorgoneia filter into Italic graves in the 5th and 4th centuries BCE. Etruscan bronzes copy archaic tusks with a relish for grotesque. A gorgoneion, a century later, rides on the central boss of a Roman, scutum in relief rather than paint. By the time Ovid recasts Medusa's past, the image has been speaking Latin in houses and streets for generations. What the poet adds is a crime scene inside a shrine, the Temple of Athena violated by Poseidon. He gives us a datable voice, Augustine, and a book, Metamorphoses, Book IV, that amounts to a court transcript of what the face must mean if the gods are as they are. In the Greek world, the head's last classical stop is still Athena's chest. When Pausanias tours Greece in the 2nd century CE and writes down what he sees, he notes gorgoneia as though they were normal furniture in sanctuaries, which they were by then. He lists a shield here and a statue there, and keeps walking. His calm tells us that the archaic ferocity has been absorbed into civic calm without disappearing. The stone pediment on Corfu, the metope at Selinunte, and the red figure cups in Attic graves keep their dates and their tones. The ivory and gold Athena in the Parthenon gave the city a center. Ovid gave the world a wound. The cave where the act occurred smells now only of damp and bat musk. The bag is elsewhere. The cap and sandals have been returned to their gods. The blade has been wiped and hung. The head has found a permanent address from which it can be borrowed forever. When a sculptor in Florence in the 16th century CE welds bronze to show a man holding up a dripping trophy, he will call back not only to Ovid's Latin, but to the old square at Selinus, and to the black eyes on kylikes from 520 BCE that taught drinkers to meet the unendurable by drinking with it. When a Lombard painter in Rome stretches a drum-shaped shield and fixes a face upon it with oil around 1597, he will be speaking directly to an Athenian who stood below Phidias's Athena and looked up. Those later hands have not moved yet in this line of time, but the image they will grip has already learned how to live in bronze and hide. A breeze crosses a courtyard on the Athenian Acropolis sometime in the last quarter of the 5th century BCE. The robe on the Parthenon's Athena Parthenos casts a bright reflection and then stills. The gorgoneion set at the center of the aegis collects the noon like a coin. A visitor who has just seen Attic vases in workshops at the base of the hill and walked past the old wooden image in the Erechtheion now sees how the story has settled into the city's center without fraying its edges. The head that once belonged to a body on a sea-damp rock shelf in a cave beyond Oceanus now belongs to a goddess and a polis and, by way of a Latin poet's rephrasing, to a question that no gate can shut. The question will cross the sea. It will be carved on Roman cameos, painted on Pompeian walls, and hammered onto legionary shields in relief. It will survive the gods it once served and keep working in houses that burn incense to new names. It stands now at the edge of that crossing like a traveler, with a single bag as if waiting for a sign to move. The head on the aegis does not blink. The shield turns slightly on the goddess's arm, and sunlight crawls across the carved lips that no longer show tusks. A Roman visitor will come and write about it. A Renaissance eye will come and seize it. A modern page will argue whether the face guards or accuses. For the moment between a Greek temple's shade and the wide road to Italy, the image holds its breath and watches the threshold open. Marble cools the air under the loggia, and the bronze needs no drumbeat to command a crowd. A hand holds a head by a fistful of snakes, and rivulets along the severed neck crawl toward the toes of the man who raised the blade. The Florentine light glances off metal, the way sun glances off the Arno at noon, and the silence in the Piazza della Signoria stretches until you can hear the sound of a fountain behind you counting time on its lip. Before the bronze, Rome taught the head how to live in a city. In houses at Pompeii and Herculaneum sealed by 79 CE ash, threshold mosaics set a face into tesserae, where sandals would click and slow. The Capitol in Rome keeps a circular marble relief in which two wings cling to a forehead and hair renders into ribbons of snake. The stone eyes confront a visitor long after the hand that set them at a doorway lost the reason for its particular address. On cameos cut in layered sardonyx under Augustus, and Tiberius the head shrinks to the dimensions of a ring and still performs a door's work, sealing wax into obedience with a look. Legionary shields take the mask, into relief so a boss becomes an argument, and over doorways in Ostia, and on fountains in the Campus Martius smaller bronze gorgoneia do what the larger ones did at Corfu. They put a stop in the air. Ovid's verse gives the stop a backstory in the generation, when Augustus rearranges Rome's walls and laws. In Metamorphoses Book I, published around 8 CE, he lets a Roman ear hear Greek myth as a Roman crime, Medusa once beautiful, hair as the fact of it, Poseidon violating her in Athena's temple, the goddess's punishment turning beauty into a weapon. The Latin Caesare make the slash of a blade feel inevitable and indecent at once. The city whose emperors love an image with a bite takes the head into its atria and forums without pretending the paradox is tidy. A shrine to Minerva on the Aventine can keep a carved aegis with a small, exquisite mask at its center. The same city can hang mosaics of the face in baths, where steam makes everyone's skin anonymous. The goddesses and the plumbing obey the same logic. Fear, rightly placed, is a public utility. The Middle Ages inherit the face and change the room around it. In late antique and Byzantine houses, words like phi epsilon lambda, alpha kappa tau, e rho iota omicron nu survive the amulet whose business is to guard, and cast bronze gorgoneia keep their jobs alongside crosses on door iron. In Rome, where temples become churches and marble pediments get spolia into apses, the head slips onto misericords and capitals as a grotesque among grotesques, not as a forgotten goddess, but as an active threshold sign that now sits under sermons. Latin mythographers keep the stories in writing. When statues lose their altars, Fulgentius in the late 5th or early 6th century glosses the Gorgon as a moral emblem whose sight kills corrupt desire. The anonymous mythographus Vaticanus in the 9th century files Medusa among pagan fables and reads her as allegory. Manuscript illuminators in the 12th and 13th centuries paint small green-eyed faces on the corners of folios that copy Ovid's lines in a hand bent over a wooden desk. The Ovid Metamorphoses in Old French in the early 14th century retells the Latin in rhyme for a court that wants a lesson under its pretty horrors, and the head, which once shut a temple door on Corfu, now polices a page where a reader's gaze moves as carefully as a priest walking the nave. Venice and Florence make the past a workshop. In 1370s Tuscany, Giovanni Boccaccio compiles his Genealogia Deorum Gentilium in Latin, gathering Greek and Roman gods into a catalog humanists can carry from shelf to shelf. His pages sort Medusa and her sisters with a confidence that claims reference as a form of possession. By 1556, in Venice, Vincenzo Cartari prints his Immagini Dei with woodcuts that give Medusa a body and a stare a printer's black can hold. Natale Conti's Mythology in 1551 pushes the apparatus toward encyclopedic, and the learned world agrees to store the head in books. When it is not mounted on a wall, the change is not cosmetic. A mask that once kept envy out of a house now trains in legal Latin and Tuscan vernacular to stand for ideas that law needs and fear recognizes. Then Cosimo I de' Medici orders a sculpture that puts blood and grammar in the same gesture. Cellini sets the first wax around 1545 and takes the bronze out of its shell in the mid-1550s, finishing Perseus with the head of Medusa between 1545 and 1554 for the Loggia dei Lanzi, where Florentine weddings cross the square under open arches. He gives the hero Hermes Talaria and the Harpes crescent and a torso that twists the way an athlete's twist refuses to end. He plants the Gorgon's body at the hero's feet with such clarity that children count the snakes like beads. Lost wax casting leaves in the bronze, a record of breath bubbles, risers, the places where a mold invited air, and metal to argue. The base carries reliefs that turn the myth into a set of rooms. A citizen can walk to the loggia and see a Roman story taller than the men who tell it, hear Ovid's outrage without hearing Latin, and feel the cold, small wind a bronze gives off when its temperature settles to the morning. Cosimo wanted a sign that Medici order could tame Florentine violence. The city got a machine for making a public threshold out of a private glance. A few decades later, a painter answers the metal with eyes. Michelangelo Merisi de Caravaggio, around 1597, takes a convex wooden shield, coats it smooth, and turns his own face into Medusa's face at the instant she knows her head is separate from her body. The commission routes through Cardinal del Monte to Grand Duke Ferdinando I de' Medici. The finished disc finds a wall at the Uffizi where visitors still pause to watch blood bead in oil along a neck. The trick of painting on a convex surface means the image pushes into space the way a bronze stands in it. A viewer's reflection bends along the curve and makes the argument of the shield, the reflective instrument that saved Perseus, an argument of the painting. The painter's realism makes the snakes look plausible, the horror domestically precise, and the self-portrait rumor holds is not vanity, but a technical pledge. I will become the monster to show you how it works. Rome codified a sacrilege in elegant couplets. Florence lets the crime look back. Baroque Rome gives the head a new mood, sorrow in stone. Gian Lorenzo Bernini, in the late 1630s, carves Medusa in marble that teachers call alive even when they're bored of saying it. The Capitoline museums keep her. The eyes are wet, the mouth is parted, and the snakes lift like locks caught by an indoor breeze. The bust refuses the grotesque, refuses the triumph, and insists on the feeling a Roman poet added to the fact a Greek pediment knew how to hold. Every curl and scale moves the story a degree away from the doorway, where a gorgoneion once hung, but the function survives. The viewer stops. In stopping, the old apotropaion performs its work again on different nerves. The Enlightenment's appetite for clarity turns the mask toward anatomy. Antonio Canova completes Perseus with the head of Medusa in marble between 1804 and 1806 for the Vatican's Museo Pio Clementino. The body is a theorem of limbs, the contrapposto a geometry with a human weight, and the head dangling from one hand is more emblem than event. A second version will enter the Metropolitan Museum in New York. Both tame the gore until the severed neck looks like a seal cut clean on white stone. The neoclassical eye chooses form over fluid, but the same objects, the sickle, the sandals, the bag descend along a chain of marble and bronze from Selinus and Corfu. What changes is the distance between the viewer and the blood. Antiquarians collect and argue in rooms lined with cabinets. In 1593, Cesare Ripa publishes his Iconologia in Rome, an emblem book that assigns personifications their props. If you want to paint fury or terror, Ripa shows you which attributes to borrow. A gorgoneion enters the recipe like salt. In the 17th and 18th centuries, scholars like Athanasius Kircher gather gems and bronzes and draw them in copper plate, the Gorgon head among them, as if knowledge itself were a kind of apotropaion against confusion. Catalogues of the Uffizi, and the Capitoline give inventory numbers to heads that had once hissed off roofs at rain, and Vettius Pollio's fish pond cruelties in Seneca's letters give way to debates about the derivation of a Greek word for a bag. To modern ears, these rooms smell like dust and academic ink, but under the labels, the old function persists. A researcher's eye meets a look that will not let a sentence pass without stopping at its threshold. The 19th and 20th centuries teach the head to speak theory. In 1922, Sigmund Freud drafts a short essay called Das Medusenhaupt, Medusa's Head, in which he reads the horror as a picture of castration anxiety, the snakes for hair as an overabundance of signifiers of the thing that terrifies, the petrifaction as a compromise that saves by stopping. Jean-Pierre Vernat in 1985, in a study whose French title, La mort dans les yeux, insists on what the Greeks already staged, describes the Gorgon as a figure for the lethal gaze. Death entered through vision and diverted by techniques like mirrors and angles. Marina Warner, in Monuments NET, Maidens the same year, reads how cities put women's bodies to work as allegories, and how Medusa's face, mounted on Athena's chest, makes a female figure into a civic shield. Barbara Creed, in 1993, in a book called The Monstrous-Feminine, reads cinematic horror through psychoanalysis and puts Medusa among the icons that let a viewer rehearse fear of the female body as if it were a myth one could learn to watch without being consumed. Theory layers itself like paint on a shield. The wood under the gesso is still a round convex surface that resists. Feminist writers take Ovid's Roman pivot and refuse to leave it at paradox. In 1975, Hélène Cixous publishes Le Rire de la Méduse, The Laugh of the Medusa, and asks women to write with the body the way the myth had made the body into a weapon, turn the mirror against fear, refuse the script in which a goddess punishes a girl for a god's crime, sees the head as a symbol not of shame, but of a look that refuses to be yoked. The essay glances back at Corfu and sees a temple face. It glances at Ovid and sees a violated sanctuary. It glances at Caravaggio and sees a painter painting his own terror. The invitation is practical. Change how you hold the shield. Stop using it only to keep things out. Let it show a world to itself without an intermediary. If the theoretical language feels far from stone and bronze, the museums will correct your sense of distance. In Munich's Glyptothek, the Medusa Rondinini still gives the beautiful, terrible face a marble that glows gray in winter daylight. In Florence, the Uffizi hangs Caravaggio's shield a staircase away from Titian's Venus of Urbino, turning the corridor itself into a threshold between Eros and alarm. In Rome, the Capitoline's Bernini bust holds your eye for a measure of seconds that feels longer. The rooms impose a new kind of ritual. No one mounts gorgoneia on modern gutters, but thousands of bodies file under faces that still regulate the pace of their feet. The image does not evaporate outside gallery walls. A fashion house founded in 1978 chooses Medusa's head for a logo and stamps it in gold on leather. A pedestrian in Milan in the 1990s walks past a window where a severed head has learned to sell silk. A stop-motion animator in 1981, Ray Harryhausen, gives a serpentine tail and a bow to a film's Medusa in Clash of the Titans. And in 2010, a digital remake gives the head a weight that bone can feel, while the arrow leaves the string. Street murals in Athens after 2008 spray a green-eyed face on shuttered metal at dawn. A teenager takes a picture on a phone and adds a filter named after a goddess. These echoes are not a catalog, they are proof of respiration. Under the echoes, the old argument continues. Is the head a wall that keeps harm out, or is it a wound held up so no one can pretend not to see? The Roman poet's temple scene keeps seeding the ground. Some scholars frame the story as a caution about violation in sacred space, not a myth about a monster. Some return to archaic stone and insist that the face protects without needing backstory. Some read Athena's aegis as the clearest evidence. That patriarchal order weaponizes whatever it can, this head included, to police a line. The debate does not fracture the object. It makes the object do what it did on Selinus's square metope: fix a goddess, a hero, and a head in one stone, so the mind has to hold all three at once. Meanwhile, the look itself has learned to live in lenses. Mirrors in a temple and bronze shields in a cave are now camera glass and phone screens. The logic is old: do not meet the thing. That will undo you directly. Let a surface carry the danger safely. In 2024, a visitor photographs Caravaggio's shield, and their face bends with Medusa's along the convex curve. The photograph shows the viewer behind the monster they wanted to keep at arm's length. The apparatus preserves the ancient choreography of glancing, the moment when a reflective tool lets you face what you cannot face without help. If you want the archaeology again, you can walk it. At Corfu, the monolithic pediment from around 580 BCE still runs in place above a gallery floor. The Knilof frozen, panthers flanking, Pegasus and Chrysaor at the knees. At Selinunte, the metope now in Palermo lets you trace with a fingertip. If the guards let you the curving edge of a harpe carved when archaic eyes still loved tusks. In Athens, the Parthenon's lost goddess survives in descriptions, and in the way bronzes and reliefs repeat the gorgoneion at the center of the aegis. In Rome, the Rondinini head remembers a classical original that softened tusk into lip. Each stop repeats the threshold's lesson. Attention is the price of passage. If you want the book, you can read it in different Gospels. Hesiod in the late 8th or early 7th century BCE names Stheno, Euryale, and Medusa and gives a fact that will fuel everything: only one can die. Homer sets the head on a goddess's aegis and under the earth's lid as a threat you never quite see. Pseudo-Apollodorus, in the Bibliotheca centuries later, assembles the equipmentless cap, sandals, bag, blade, and makes the route of the quest transparent. Ovid puts a goddess's temple in the path of a god and changes the color of the whole world the head moves through. Pausanias, walking Greece in the 2nd century CE, notes gorgoneia as if pointing out chairs. Boccaccio, Cartari, Conti, Ripa copy and translate and engrave until a library looks like a sanctuary. Freud, Vernant, Warner, Sixus, Creed take the face into clinics, classrooms, and studios and return with diagnoses and manifestos. The text does what the artifact did. It guards and it provokes. The old house uses remains stubborn. In an Anatolian town, a late Roman mosaic of Medusa still lies where it was laid, in a building that became a ruin. When a river changed its curve, a farmer gestures for you to stand on a plank so your shoes will not grind the tesserae. In a Greek village, a 19th century lintel reuses an ancient gorgoneion found in a field wall. The stone sits over a painted blue door that someone opens every day to carry bread. The child who runs under it does not know the word apotropaion, but the face sees the child home. The modern head comes with warnings printed in museum labels and with hashtags. A journalist frames Medusa as a survivor of violence in a piece published in 2017 and shares a photograph of a new bronze by Luciano Garbati that inverts Cellini's triumph by making a woman hold a man's head. Critics answer with Ovid and with court transcripts and with frank talk about statues and streets. A fashion magazine stages a shoot in the Uffizi in 2020 and places Caravaggio's shield within a spread that sells fabrics. Readers argue whether the appropriation is taste or theft. These scenes feel new because the rooms and devices are new. They are repetitions because the threshold still needs guarding, and the guard still stands at the price of being looked at. The last question is the oldest one. What exactly does the face mean when it looks back? A monster is a sign that something is wrong somewhere else. A victim is a sign that punishment is misapplied. A goddess is a sign that power has learned how to hold an instrument without breaking it. The head that lived on Corfu's pediment before any Roman line could be written does not ask to be reduced to one noun. It asks to be placed where it can do its work. In the archaic world, that place was the temple's triangle and the soldier's shield. In the classical world, it was a goddess's aegis and a cup's inner circle. In the Roman world, it was a mosaic's center and a cameo's oval. In the medieval world, it was a manuscript margin and a grotesque under a roof. In the Renaissance, it was a piazza where a duke announced a new order. In the Baroque, it was a bust whose mouth wanted a breath it had lost. In ours, it is a screen and a logo and an essay and a protest and a door. The face endures because thresholds endure. Every community has places where entry must be negotiated. A sanctuary under a cedar roof on Kerkyra around 580 BCE, a room in a domus off the Via della Bondanza in Pompeii in 50 CE, a scriptorium in Paris in 1315, a square in Florence in 1554, a gallery in Rome in 1639, a museum in New York in 1806, a feed on a phone in Kiev in 2025. At each passage, someone mounts a sign that says, "Stop, look, now proceed." The Gorgon's head began as that sign, and it learned languages to keep its job. In one reading, the face is a way to hold terror in front of you, so it cannot take your back. In another, it is a way to remember a crime no altar can wash. In a third, it is a way for a city to concentrate its courage into one point and wear it. All three readings can sit on one shield, because a shield is a moving border, and the communities that make shields have always asked images to do more than one thing at once. When Athena lifts the aegis in Homer's 8th century BCE lines, when a mason sets a stone at Selinus around 550 BCE, when a painter in 1597 turns wood into a glassless mirror, when a theorist in 1975 writes a laugh into a page, the same action holds. The look is being handled with care. The last image returns to where the first stood. A doorway in the dark with a face above it, wide eyes ringed with grooves cut by a hand that learned the pattern from an older hand. The air has weight the way it did in a cave, where limestone sweated on rock. The promise is the same bargain pronounced in different grammars for 3 millennia: pass beneath and be seen, or turn away and leave your fear at the threshold. the head offers no conclusion. It offers a place to stand where fear and protection meet and do not annihilate each other. That is why the image endures. It is not a sentence. It is the silence before you cross.